what is the Courageous Leader Roadmap? And then what are some courageous activities that most leaders ultimately end up avoiding in their career?
Oftentimes, to be our most successful selves, whether it's an individual contributor or a leader, it's less about what we know and more about who we are. I want you to just think for a second about all the skills that we're taught, whether it's decision making, negotiating, goal setting, coaching, feedback. Those are important, yes. But when we rely too heavily on those and don't have a really strong sense of who we are and how we operate at our best, then we can't leverage all those great skills to actually drive the outcomes we want.
Welcome back to this episode of Secrets of the Career Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden, and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know that they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtains and some tips and tricks to ultimately make you successful in your career and help you progress a little bit faster.
Hello, hello. On today's podcast, we have an amazing guest for you guys. Whitney Faires is joining us. She is an internationally recognized executive coach. She is a keynote speaker and a leadership advisor with over 20 years of experience in the healthcare industry. She was a chief of staff to the CFO at Intuitive Surgical. She has an incredible career experience for us and is going to help us with many of the topics we talk about on Secrets of the Career Game. So Whitney, thanks so much for joining us. We're glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So why don't you tell listeners a little bit about your career journey? Obviously, you had a very impressive background. You scaled the career ladder yourself. Now you're taking some of those lessons and teaching them back. Kind of take us on that journey with you.
Yeah. So I started out my career in sales. I loved business and medicine. And so I thought, how do I put them together? I didn't want to be a doctor. And I started out in the pharmaceutical space. And sales took me into med device very quickly. And there were just so many great learnings. I loved the challenge of sales, but I just so much admired the leaders and thought it's the best of both worlds. You get to do something really challenging, but you get to do the work by developing people. And then I got to this point in my career where I thought, where do I go? And I think so often we look up just what's the next job, but it created a good pause for me to say, where do I want to be in 5 to 10 years? And is the next best job up or is it across? And that's what led to me making my first career pivot, where I moved from sales into commercial operations and launched a startup within my med device company that I was working at, and built that to from an idea to a global function alongside my partner. And then I kind of hit that next point where I said, where do I want to be long term? Like, what's my final kind of adventure in my career? And leadership was always so close to my heart. And so I moved into a role where I was chief of staff, but I also got to lead an org health function. And that's where I had a whole team running new talent programs, leadership development. It was my absolute favorite job I've ever done. But I had this, I don't know if you'd say a calling, but deep down, I wanted to focus 100% of my energy to helping people be at their best. And as much as I love the corporate space and it did so many great things for me, I wanted to do that day in and day out. And in the corporate world, you have to do budgets and all these other things. And so that's what prompted me to launch my own company, where, as you mentioned, I'm in advisory, coaching, but I get to stand on big stages and help inspire people to action, which I love doing.
It's such a wonderful story, and there's so many parallels between you and I's experiences that we could probably do a whole episode on that journey. But one of the things you touched on that I really love is you talked about moving side to side in your career and these career pivots. And something I've talked about before on the podcast that I'm really passionate about is I hate the term career ladder because it implies you only move up. And the
Yeah.
reality is, I had a CHRO tell me this once. She said, your career is more like a lattice. Sometimes you move sideways, sometimes you move diagonally, sometimes you move backwards, sometimes you move back up. And it's all of those different turning points that ultimately make your career what it is. So I love hearing that step back, that assessment, like, is up the right direction, or is there something else that we may want to be exploring as you progress your career?
Yeah, I like the idea of a lattice. I think about it as a jungle gym. Sometimes you have to go sideways to go up. And I think the hardest part about that for people is we feel like there's this path that we're supposed to be on. But ultimately, if we do what we're supposed to do, I think that sometimes leads us to paths that aren't the most fulfilling or aren't where we're at our best. So it takes a lot of courage, I think, to do that pause and to have the criteria in your mind to make the decision, do I move up? Do I move over? And sometimes it's really tough because over may be a true lateral move. It may even mean less pay or, what will people think of me? But I believe those are the tough decisions that really make people, because it's easy just to go up. It's hard to carve a path that's unique, but that's where I think you build such a diverse perspective that makes you different from everyone once you get to that next job that's up, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's so true what you're sharing. I think I think of when we picked your major in college, right? Like how many people graduated with the major they picked initially? Probably less than half. And then how many people actually do something related to that major? Like we evolve over time and we outgrow certain things that we were really interested in. I see this a lot. I'm going to use accounting as an example. Sorry if you're listening and you're an accountant. Like I studied accounting and I became an accountant and then I'll become a controller and then I'll become a CPA. Like there's this very vertical path there. And a lot of the time when people in that vertical come to me, they're just not happy. But the vertical makes sense and it's a comfort zone. And so they don't always look side to side. So there's so much great, nuggets of good introspection in what you're sharing that will really help people find the ideal career. And you talked about it requiring courage. I 1000% agree with that. It takes a brave soul to go, no, I don't want that promotion that you're telling me I should take. And from that, you created the Courageous Leader Roadmap, right? Which is all about building that influence, building that trajectory without becoming like the robot that just moves up into that next role. So, what is the Courageous Leader Roadmap? And then what are some courageous activities that most leaders ultimately end up avoiding in their career?
That's a great two-part question. So bring me back to topic if I miss one. So the Courageous Leader Roadmap functions on the premise that oftentimes to be our most successful selves, whether it's an individual contributor or a leader, it's less about what we know and more about who we are. I want you to just think for a second about all the skills that we're taught, whether it's decision making, negotiating, goal setting, coaching, feedback. Those are important, yes. But when we rely too heavily on those and don't have a really strong sense of who we are and how we operate at our best, then we can't leverage all those great skills to actually drive the outcomes we want. And so the Courageous Leader Roadmap was inspired by trying to help people really turn inwards and figure out how we be at our best so that we can then leverage all of the strengths that we have, the skills that we have to actually drive the outcomes that we want. And so there are 5 parts in it. I'm happy to go through it, but one of the ones that I think is most impactful is I encourage everyone to define their leadership identity. And I think so often we come into whatever career we have and we aren't really intentional about what guides us. Who do we want to be? How do we want to show up? What are our principles for leading and achieving in this organization, whatever that may be? And it's almost like living your life without core values. Yes, your core values come with you. I'm not saying that they're the complete departure, but there's an intentionality that we have to really know who we are and show up with intention. And that affects our results, our influence, again, the ability to leverage those skills. And so I kind of take 5 different components that are everything from executing with resilience to fearless communication to activating your power zone. These things that we can do and control and develop within ourselves to be at our best. And I call it the Courageous Leader Roadmap because they all take courage. Fearless communication, for example, I define that as refusing to let fear decide what gets said. Sounds really easy. But we all know in the moment where we have to give hard feedback to maybe our boss or someone who works for us or a peer, that's hard to do. So these are all things that take courage to really look inward, to hold ourselves accountable. And that was my inspiration for creating it. Your second question was around
What we avoid, which I think you kind of touched on with that introspection. But if there's another one you wanted to mention that courageous leaders tend to kind of sidestep, I'd love to hear that as well.
Yeah, I think what we often sidestep is looking hard at having the awareness in the courage to look deeply at our gaps, not our skill gaps, but our gaps as I won't call it a person, but the risks that maybe we're risk adverse. And so we say something, but we say it really, kind of vaguely and softened. So we don't have that impact, but we also don't have the risk. Or how we struggle to really be authentic. Like we know who we want to be, but that's not exactly who our boss is. So we'll just kind of be a version of ourselves. But that's really where our value comes in. Is great companies hire for diversity of experience, style, approach, all of those things. And so often to be a courageous leader, we have to bring that, but it starts with knowing who we are and in saying, okay, for the person that I want to be, how do I be that person most effectively? Because there's just because we're authentic, there are right ways and wrong ways to display that based on your company and what you do and who you work with.
I'd be curious to hear your take. I love the topic of honest, unbiased introspection. How often of your clients that come to you to work with you would you say come in already knowing who they are versus how many have a skewed perception of themselves and their gaps and their capabilities? And you don't obviously have to have like a stat ready for me, but I would just be curious to get your take because this is something I've talked about on the podcast lots of times of understanding yourself, how important it is. But I feel like I often see that people don't really know themselves. So I'd be curious anecdotally to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I think that it ranges from people that are very off base because they are confusing effort or intention with how they're perceived, which you can have great intention, but doesn't mean you're perceived well and you're showing up the way that you want to people that are a blend. We can't separate from ourselves as much as we try so hard to understand how we are received and how we're showing up. We just can't because we are the person, right? So I think most people that come to me, they're pretty high achieving professionals. They've gotten feedback. They're self starters in seeking out where they need to grow. So I think they have a good understanding, but I think how to get there is the thing that they're trying to solve. Because it's a fine line. It's like, well, I want to be this and I want to do it my way, but how do I do that? And usually, it's the stuff below the surface that I'm working on. We all have this way that we show up or a skill that we have on the surface that's visible. But there's something that drives that. And that's the work to be done is what's below the surface that's driving us to be a certain way, to come off in a certain way. And, we may say, yes, we like that. Or we may say, I want to tweak it or it's not what I intend. And that's the work that we do.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think it is hard. I talk a lot about people getting tunnel vision, right? We are the most important people to ourselves, right? And so we perceive ourselves a certain way. We have certain priorities, certain needs. And when we interact with others in interpersonal situations, we tend to project our thoughts of ourselves, our expectations of ourselves on other people. And so I always think it's interesting. You used risk aversion as an example. I'm incredibly risk averse, like very, very, very risk averse. And it has come up in multiple performance reviews over the course of my career that like, hey, you do a great job, but you don't take enough risks. And it's funny because as I progressed my career, the fact that I didn't take risks made me very, very successful in a lot of places where people really struggled. Um, but I had that awareness of like, this is a struggle for me. If you have a role that requires taking lots of risks, I may not be the right person for that position, right? So having that self-awareness is definitely key. As people build this, as they start to progress their careers, as they're growing, how are your clients and leaders in general starting to separate themselves from everyone else? Like those high achieving leaders that we think of really highly, what do you see that those leaders who are thriving are doing that maybe some of the other leaders aren't bringing with them on that journey?
Yeah. Well, I think that as people move from doing more individualized work, being individual contributors or being leaders without a team underneath them, they shift into people leadership. And we typically start as managers. And I think that that's really our ability to manage the business and manage the people. which that's a people leadership role. But the people that are truly exceptional know how to make that next up level in skills, which is to truly be a leader. And the difference is, with managing people in the business, you're doing just that. You're looking at tasks. You're coaching to an outcome. You are helping people execute on a daily basis. When you shift to leadership, you become influential in the sense that people they're seeking you out, not just on your team, but you have this brand of impact. And you also are able to go far beyond the business to really focus on how do you develop the people to do more. So with the same amount of resources, you can get different results. And that is a win for the people, for the business, and for you, because it's a really fun place to be. That's where I think a lot of that work around the courageous leader comes in. Is it happens when you really look at yourself and go, okay, where am I excelling and where do I need to make shifts? Do I know who I am? Am I leading with intention? Am I connecting with my people? Am I operating from the zone where I thrive? And that's where it becomes about who you are and not just the skill sets.
This is one of the reasons, Whitney, why I talk about this a lot, that I think like the jump to director is the hardest jump in corporate. Because to your exact point, an IC, you're managing your tasks. A manager, you're managing the tasks of others. And then all of a sudden, we're like, we need you to be a leader and think strategically and have resource limitation conversations and educate the board and have influence and manage up effectively and drive a roadmap. Like all these skills that start to exist at the director, senior director, VP role are almost completely non-existent prior to that point in your career. And I think what you're talking about aligns very closely with that. Is that's where I see a lot of people drop, is like, oh, but this is a totally different skill set than what I've had in the past. And now I have to find a way to display it. I have to find a way to execute it. And it's not taught, right? That's why you and I do what we do, is like, nobody teaches you how to do these things. They're just like, can you figure it out or drown? And so I'd love to hear, as you're learning these skills, as you're becoming an influential leader, the more senior you get, the more ingrained in like the corporate politics side we become, right? This podcast is called Secrets of the Career Game for that exact reason, which is at some point you're dealing with the politics of the career game and not just your execution of the work. So how do you help leaders really navigate, one, corporate politics at all, but two, how to navigate corporate politics without kind of losing their authenticity? As you mentioned earlier, like, oh, I want to be this person, but my boss doesn't really like that person, so I'll be this version. Like, what does navigating corporate politics look like in your coaching, and how do they do that without losing their authentic sense of self?
Yeah. Well, I would agree with you. I think that jump to director level is really challenging because it's a whole nother set of skills that you often haven't done. So you're right. You're now oftentimes leading people leaders. You have new skills like strategic thinking, decision making, that you're having to practice, and you have a whole different org dynamic. So the best way I've helped people navigate this is to create alignment. You have to really understand what's important within various functions of the organization, those that you work with. So I think it's like macro to micro thinking. You have to, obviously at the highest level of the company, know the priorities, but as the various stakeholders that you interact with, you have to take time to learn them and their business, because then you're able to form some form of connection or common ground. It doesn't mean you're friends or you like everybody, but you know enough to speak their language. And when you come to them with things that need to be done, with problems that have to be solved, you can speak from a place of understanding and not, here's what I need to make this thing work for me, because no one likes to hear that. And I think the number one miss is that takes time. It may mean that I have to go to someone that I know and say, I don't know anybody in regulatory, but I have this thing that I have to do, and I need someone from regulatory to provide inputs on this. And I know if I go to them, it's going to be like a 3-month queue. I don't have that sort of time. So who can give me the first step of connection? Can my leader give me some feedback? How do I build those relationships just in a way that deepens my understanding so that we can have a productive conversation and I can navigate all the no's that I'm going to get to be able to find common ground in a way that doesn't scorch the earth behind me. Because the last thing we want to do is be like, well, this has to happen and here's why and how do we do it? And then people say, I hope she never comes to me again, right? That's not the brand that you want to create. So sometimes I think we have to slow down and work more strategically, but in a genuine way, not like what's in it for me, so that we can have a productive conversation that compels someone to want to work with us.
Yeah, I think so much of navigating corporate politics is having foundational relationships, right? And that's where you're talking about spending the time to build these strategic connections across your stakeholder groups. A lot of what I see happen in corporate politics is because of miscommunication or lack of understanding, right? That's where people get petty and there's scope grabbing and there's backstabbing and there's omitting people from meetings is because we didn't take the time, to your point, Whitney, of like just getting to know them and understanding them and being a resource to them the same way that they are to us. And it's interesting, quick story time. I mentored a group of young women over the summer, and one of them asked me in a networking conversation, what would you say is the difference between networking and using someone? And I was like, that's a very insightful question for a 16-year-old to be asking in a mentoring session. And I said that the difference is, one, you're showing up authentically as yourself with genuine curiosity and interest in the other person. It's not just about what they can do for you. And two, you would return the favor. If you need something from them, you would be just as likely to help them if they needed something from you. And having those two pieces builds more of an authentic networking connection as opposed to using. And I think of it all the time in the context of what you're describing of, it's much easier if I already know Whitney and then I have to go ask Whitney for something. That is a much easier exchange than if I've never talked to Whitney before and now I have to go to a meeting and be like, hey,
Could you help me?
can you help me side of desk in addition to your actual job do all of these things that I need, right? Like that's a bigger challenge. So I love that you're talking about building those relationships. Where do you see this go awry? Because we talked a lot about like, hey, you should be doing this. You should be reaching out, building these stakeholder relationships. What is the opposite of that? Like, what are you seeing people do that's contrary to that, that's actually hurting them in the long run?
Yeah, I think it's leading from or communicating a position of power, whether that's your position or you say, hey, I report to this person and this is a key priority for him or her. And we got to find a way to get this done. Because you're basically saying you have to do it because my boss is going to tell you you have to if you don't do it for me. And that's not collaborative. I think it also goes awry when we're not willing to compromise. It's not going to be our way all the time. So yes, we may say this, there is a goal to get this whole thing done and presentable in 2 weeks. And the person is going, I cannot do 2 weeks. Are we going to seek to understand and figure out how we create a solution? Because maybe the solution isn't that person, but they can put you to somebody else who can help you get it further. So maybe we can get it done in 2 weeks and 2 days. But we have to be willing to compromise and be open-minded. When we come into situations with our vision and our approach, you're going to lose because nobody wants your vision and approach pushed upon them. But I think where people really differentiate themselves is when they do this well, their brand within an organization is like, hey, I work with Whitney on this team, and gosh, I learned stuff by working with her, and she had a big ask, but she's willing to be flexible, and gosh, like that was a really great experience. That's what we want from it, because ultimately you never know when those people are going to show up in the room that's making a decision about you or your team or resources that you get. You want your body of work to speak to someone that you're proud of and not someone that's panicking in the moment.
1,000%. I often say it's even in my book, I say that your brand enters a room before you do, right? Who you've been historically, how you've interacted in the past, how you've built relationships is going to show up in that room before you ever step foot into it. So as people are building this influence, as they're building this visibility, as they're building these relationships, how do they avoid falling into that trap of almost like overexposure, right? Because we have to have some exposure and visibility in order to move up the chain, in order to have advocates in those rooms that we're not in. How do we not over pivot?
Yeah. So this is a slippery slope because I have this love-hate relationship with brand because you have to address it and you want to play an active role in it. But if you over-engineer it, it comes off as fake and it does way more harm than good. So I think the number one thing is you have to let your body of work do the talking. So that's not just the results that you drive or the people on your team, but how they do the work. It goes back to what I was saying. Are you collaborative? Are you driving an initiative because it has to be done? Are you listening and engaging other teams versus, pushing things from your perspective? So you have to let your results and what people say about you do the talking versus you trying to create the brand. That being said, yes, like there are times where you want sources of feedback outside what you normally get. So you might seek out a mentor or a senior leader and say, listen, I'm working on these things and it's important for my development. And I would love your feedback on how I do. Ask those things genuinely. The ask is not to be the advocate for me in the room. If your body of work is something that they trust and the interactions that you have around getting feedback and getting advice are high quality both ways, that person is going to say, hey, how could I help you? And then, then you can say, well, from your interactions with me, if my name comes up or there's a project that you think I could contribute to, if you could just speak positively about me, that'd be great. But you have to earn that right. And again, it comes from that self awareness to go, should I make this ask right now? If they don't tip you off that they're willing to advocate for you, it's probably a slippery slope. So you might want to tread lightly.
Absolutely. I want to say absolutely again, because I just agree with absolutely everything that you're saying. But I think that when it comes to networking, people feel uncomfortable about it. One, because they don't know what to talk about. And two, because they don't want to have to make an ask. And what I tell clients all the time is like, there's very little situations ever where we should be making an ask outside of your direct boss or maybe their boss. Those two resources, there may come a time where you say, hey, I'm expecting promotion in the next 6 to 12 months. What do I need to do to get there? There may be an ask in those. But for most of your other relationship, it's like, hey, teach me, show me how to do this. You do this really well. Like, what advice do you have for me? Hey, here's a sticky situation I find myself in. How would you navigate it? How can you help me? And I'll give this quick story. When I was coming up in my career, somebody gave me feedback, positive in intent, poorly delivered. And I
Yeah.
went to my mentor and I was like, I don't know how to interpret this. I'm not asking you to get involved because it was delivered poorly. I'm asking you to help me figure out what it is I need to do to change this perception. And their feedback was like, well, that was delivered really poorly. I'm like, yeah, it wasn't great. But like, if I look past that, there's clearly something happening in my behavior that's leading to this type of conversation. So like, what do I need to do to make it better? And they were like, well, so and so in our org had a similar reputation 2 years ago and she just got promoted 2 times. Like, I would go talk to her. And that individual ended up being a huge mentor for me, changed my career around. So I think it's that type of engagement when you're building these relationships of like, hey, teach me, help me navigate a situation. You're good at this and you've gotten promoted. How do I do that? More so than like, will you sign this petition to promote Kendall because she's great? Like, I hope nobody's doing that. If you're walking into your networking meetings, like, hey, can you sign this paperwork saying I'm great?
Then
That's
I would say the whole process is broken if that's how it's working.
and
But
you're
the other thing I would say about mentorship is I think you have to be willing to come prepared and drive the conversation and do the work. The worst thing is when someone comes to you, and I've had a lot of people reach out for mentoring. Most of the time, I have a hard time saying no, but most of the time, I'm happy I did. Happy I said yes. That is, but the times where I kind of pass on the next meeting is when people are like, "So tell me, how did you become a leader, and what do I need to know?" That's so broad. Come with specifics. Come with your reflection of where you have strengths and where you have opportunities that you want advice on how maybe I do that or I know other people do it. And then the next time we talk, be prepared to high level. Hey, I've been working on trying this and it hasn't worked out so well. I'm still trying to figure out like how I do this authentically to me. Because that's where the real work is done. This is a transaction about I'm going to give to you. I want to see the progress so then I can keep giving to you because there's no point in giving and giving, giving if it's just, hey, like it's in my notebook. That doesn't make you any better. That doesn't contribute to your team or the organization or whatever. And when you have to make a bold ask, don't try to act like it's not a bold ask. I had one of the craziest asks I ever made. I was at this Women in Leadership conference. I saw this woman, Molly Fletcher, speak. And she's amazing. And I had this vision for creating my own business, and it's a very long story, but a good one. I won't tell it all. But when I saw her, it was like the catalyst where I thought she just resonated with me. And I'm not saying I'm Molly Fletcher because I'm not, but that's who I want to be someday, to be honest. And I'm working towards it. Fast forward 3 months from that event, I was in my coach training program and we were talking about our visions for our businesses. And someone said, "Hey, who was that woman that you were referencing and that just resonated with you?" Long story short, the person knew her, lived in the same town as her. Their kids went to school together. And I had to earn some trust with him over the course of the next few sessions. And then I said, "Would you connect me?" He connected me. She got on the phone with me, and there was nothing I could really provide to her. This woman is like at the top of keynote speaking. And she said, "How can I help you?" And I asked her some questions. And I finally said, "I don't know what I need to know. And I want to build a career in this. So I need, and I'm willing to pay you a half day of your time to just learn from you. And I promise you, I will take the things that you tell me and I will action on them." And she said yes. And it happened. And it has absolutely been one of the foundational things that got me to where I am today. And she's someone I still connect with and communicate with. But that was just a wild ask. But I had to earn her trust in that short 30-minute window before I could say that. And I just owned, like, this is crazy, but this is really how you can help me if you want to know. And so I've probably had two of those asks in my career. So pick those wisely, but just own them when that's what you're doing, but not the petition. That's a bad one no matter what.
No, and it's what you're talking about, this exchange of information, taking someone's time. The most important piece is what you alluded to, which is closing that loop. Hey, you
Mhm.
told me to do this. Here's how I've done it, and here's the impact, or here's the parts I'm struggling with, or here's where I could use some more advice. Making sure that that reporting comes back to them, because we think, oh, they gave us this great advice and we implemented it. And we assume that they know that.
Right.
And they don't. They just know that they gave you of their time and their wisdom and their effort. And so making sure you close that loop is so key. And I love hearing about Molly Fletcher because I think she's fabulous as well. And it's one of those things where she probably gave you that half day, but you also probably implemented a lot of those things and sent notes back and said, "Hey, like, just so you know, I tried this and thank you so much. This was super helpful," or "Here's what I'm doing next." And it's closing that loop that's going to create that reciprocity. And then longer term, who knows? Molly may be like, "Hey, I have an event and I can't make it. Whitney, you want to take it for me?" And like, now we've got this two-way exchange that's happening, right? So I've loved our conversation. There's so many good nuggets in here. If somebody is like, "Hey, I want to start progressing up in the leadership chain. I want to really improve my presence at work, the way I'm perceived." What's something tactically tomorrow that you would be like, "Hey, go start doing this, and this is really going to help propel you towards that, executive level, director plus level that you want?"
Yeah, I would say proactively seek feedback. And that sounds simple, but so many people don't do it. And it's because, one, we assume that people will tell us. People aren't always going to tell you, especially the people that maybe you only work with here and there, but they still have observations about you. So it doesn't look like just walking around at the end of every meeting and going, "Does anyone have any feedback for me?" Because again, it's so open ended. But be thoughtful. Like if you work on a project with someone, say, "Listen, development and growth and getting better is really important to me. Do you have any feedback on how we work together on this? You're welcome to take some time and think about it. Come back to me." If you're going into a meeting and there's something that you're really working on, like I'm working on how I field objections from the executive team. And I know that my tendencies are to start talking faster or to say too much. Hopefully you have an ally in that room and you say to them going in, "I'm really working on this thing. Would you mind just keeping an eye out for it and giving me any feedback at the end?" That type of hyper focus on understanding how you're showing up and where you're effective and not is super critical for accelerating your development and really being clear about how you show up. And you said something that jogged a thought earlier, which is you said something about someone gave you feedback and you didn't necessarily see it. It was poorly delivered, but someone told me early in my career, there's always a kernel of truth in every, point of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And I have learned the hard way that that is in fact correct. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes the way it's said or the way it makes you feel makes it very difficult. I'm telling you, feedback is such a gift, and create the space for people to give it to you. And don't just go to the people that like you. Go to the people and say, I know at times we haven't always collaborated the most effectively, and my team has created more work for your team. Let's talk about how I can be better. Let's talk about how my team can be better. And that humility, it opens doors to relationships that are strained, and it opens doors to your growth and development.
Absolutely. Yes, 1,000%. And I love it. And the kernel of truth thing is so true. I tell people all the time, most managers suck at giving feedback. So be prepared for half of your feedback to suck and like sift through it for the piece that's true that you can actually work on, and then take your emotions out of it and say, okay, great. How do I get better at that thing? Because nobody wants to be told they're not perfect, right? But if we were perfect, we'd all be CEO if that's what we wanted. So I love that feedback. If people are listening to this, Whitney, and they're like, oh my God, this was amazing, I want to connect with her, what's the best way that people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, go to my website. You can always contact me there. I actively respond to all of my, messages on LinkedIn, and you can follow me at Whitney_Faires on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, we will link all of those in the show notes. If you listened to today's episode and you loved it, go ahead and give us 5 stars. Any questions for Whitney or myself, make sure you leave them below and we'll get back to you. Otherwise, Whitney, it was so great having you on the podcast. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Kendall.